If you're watching this video, it's almost a certainty that you have a smartphone. In fact, odds are you're watching this video on your phone right now. And even if you're not, it's probably sitting somewhere within arm's reach. Smartphones are all but ubiquitous in today's always connected society. I'm sure you've all had a moment where you misplaced your phone and you had a small panic attack while trying to find it. These small screens dominate our daily lives and are a lifeline to our friends and family, as well as a gateway to endless entertainment and boundless information. Because people are spending so much time on their phones, making software for them is a big business. And there is no bigger segment of the smartphone market than mobile gaming. You can't escape them. Ads for mobile games dominate your social media feeds, your YouTube pre-roll, sponsored segments from your favorite video creators. There have even been mobile game ads running during the Super Bowl. And while we may look at the questionable nature of these ads, running campaigns that are everywhere to the point of becoming a meme in and of themselves is not cheap. These companies have deep pockets, and they have them because, as we'll discuss, mobile games make money to such a staggering degree that it makes all other media look like chump change. The problem is that the way that these companies make their billions, yes, billions, tend to be even shadier than the ads they spend that money on. So let's take a closer look at what's ruining mobile games. Origins, Part 1. It started off pretty good, actually. While mobile gaming existed in various forms throughout the years, both in the traditional sense with things like the Game Boy, as well as the precursors to what we consider mobile gaming today, with companies like PopCap and PDA Gaming, when we think of the term mobile games in a modern context, we think almost exclusively about smartphones. And we can't talk about smartphones without talking about the iPhone. When the iPhone was first launched in 2007, it was a massively disruptive product that turned the entire mobile game phone industry on its head. Gone was the business-centric, email and text message-focused bricks with tiny plastic keyboards. Apple instead was looking to replicate what it did with the Mac and expand the mobile industry to a market prepped to pilfer the wallets of the masses. Clearly, they succeeded. But the first iPhone, for all its fanfare and revolutionary UI, was an extremely compromised product in its initial form. It lacked many crucial features that most other phones on the market had: 3G networking, MMS capability, video recording, and most notably, the ability to install third-party applications. Windows Mobile, Symbian, and BlackBerry, the major players during the iPhone's introduction, all could have applications created for them by third parties, which could be downloaded and installed from the internet. Basically, the same way you install applications to your desktop PC. Apple rejected this model due to security concerns. Instead, they initially pushed anyone who wanted to extend the capabilities of the iPhone to develop web apps, programs that would run via the iPhone's web browser. This would prevent them from having complete access to the system and potentially damage or otherwise compromise the user's device. However, in 2008, Apple relented and enabled third-party app development, but in its own way. It debuted the App Store, a digital storefront for the iPhone that would essentially function as iTunes for phone apps. This allowed developers to create far more complex applications that ran more efficiently than what could be done through a web browser. But the catch was, just like you could only put music on an iPod with iTunes, you could only install apps to your iPhone via the App Store. This gave Apple complete control over what could or could not be sold on their platform, and, more maliciously, allowed them to collect 30% of all revenue that could ever be potentially made via iPhone software. This was a controversial move, but that's a story for another time. The significance of the App Store is hard to understate. iOS had a massive install base, even in 2008, bolstered further by the recently released iPod Touch, and over the years would only get larger. And the fact that it was a centralized, curated storefront meant that for the first time, indie devs could leverage the huge visibility the App Store provided with virtually zero upfront cost. This was still before game consoles really embraced indie developers, and Steam programs like Greenlight and Early Access were still years away. This was, at the time, a uniquely powerful tool for small developers to get their ideas in front of a massive audience, and the market subsequently exploded, with over 500 million downloads in the App Store in the first 6 months alone. Early hits, like Trism, a game made by a single developer that sold for $5, would go on to make over $250,000 and prove the App Store model could produce massive profits. The rest of the market took notice. Google would copy the App Store model full stop, with Google Play Store, initially launched as the Android market. RIM attempted to bolt on an application store to BlackBerry OS, and Microsoft's ill-fated follow-up to Windows Mobile, Windows Phone, would also build a centralized market into their mobile OS. The model was cemented almost instantly, meaning that every new smartphone activation from that point forward also made for a new potential mobile game player. The power of mobile gaming was really twofold: its simplicity and its accessibility. Android's rise and the iPhone's continued proliferation quickly made smartphones a ubiquitous accessory to modern digital life, so it only took a few years for the vast majority of connected individuals to have one. Early on in adoption, exploring and installing apps was a central part of smartphone marketing. Most notably, Apple's long-running "There's an app for that" campaign, which conditioned new users that may have mostly stuck to software that came bundled on their desktop to explore this safer, simpler environment and extend the capabilities of their new computer in their pocket, which included trying out tons of new games. And these games were just as inviting as the platform that hosted them. Modern smartphones had no buttons. The touchscreen was the sole method of user input, which necessitated streamlined control for mobile games. Some developers would attempt to shoehorn traditional control setups onto a touchscreen, with mixed success. But the games that reached critical mass tended to lean into the limitations of touchscreen controls, making simple, digestible gameplay loops that not only catered to the canvas hosting them, but simultaneously appealed to a far larger portion of the now massive mobile phone market that traditionally would not consider themselves gamers. Tap Tap Revenge, Angry Birds, Doodle Jump, Cut the Rope, all the early mobile powerhouses looked nothing like the AAA releases on consoles and PCs, instead catering themselves to a more casual crowd that was only beginning to flirt with the idea of gaming on the go. Even early popular games like Infinity Blade, made by Epic Games, which dazzled with near-console quality visuals that gave it the look of a hardcore AAA title, had gameplay consisting entirely of simple swiping, which, while entertaining, was really no more complex than a casual game of Fruit Ninja. This ease of entry and massive install base made the mobile market ripe for exploiting, and exploit it the market would do. Part 2. The poison is injected. The App Store paved the way for digital distribution on mobile phones, but not all the pieces of the puzzle were there from the very beginning. While facilitating tons of early mobile game hits that allowed comparatively tiny teams with minuscule budgets to create massive returns due to raw scale, the actual flow of capital was still pretty simplistic. Price app low, sell once, make bank, and high volume. The nature of the phone being a portable secondary device meant that prices for games had to be much lower than the legacy gaming market. Some companies, such as Square ENIX, would play with pricing games targeting a more hardcore audience at higher prices, often upwards of $15. But these tended to never do numbers anywhere near the common household mobile games, like Fruit Ninja or Angry Birds, which all sold at, continually, lower prices. The magic number ended up being a price familiar to anyone who had owned an iPod before their new iPhone: 99 cents. This was the lowest price Apple would allow an app on their store to be sold for, and the same that they would sell a single song for on iTunes. And as the mobile market ballooned, a race to the bottom to deliver the most addictive gameplay loop for the lowest possible price eventually brought the perceived value of mobile games down to a nearly disposable entry point. This posed a problem for companies trying to get into the quickly growing mobile market. If they can only make $1 per user, then they can only make some of the money instead of all of the money, and that just wasn't good enough. The quote-unquote problem was quote-unquote solved in 2009 almost by accident by a company called Rovio and their little game called Angry Birds. Angry Birds originally launched on the App Store via the traditional mobile formula at the time: have a free light version, essentially a demo, and then a full version available for 99 cents. However, when porting the game to Android, they released it differently. The entire game was available for free, with banner ads, allowing Rovio to make money off of everyone playing the game, but with the option to remove the ads via a new feature to the Android and iPhone App Store: the in-app purchase. By paying a small fee, users on Android could permanently remove the annoying banner ads and have an experience identical to the paid version on iOS, meaning no matter how Android users played, Rovio still got paid. The in-app purchase formula was a huge financial win for Rovio, making them nearly $42 million a month in revenue. While Angry Birds wasn't the first game to leverage this model, it was the success that set the trend. And in-app purchases were the first major step in taking a space that had started as a promising platform to spotlight small projects from small teams into a perpetual money-printing machine that seemingly had no end. In this current form, though, it was hard to find much fault. Instead of being limited to a free demo and having to pay for the full version, you could choose to play entire games for free and support developers indirectly. It seemed pretty harmless, even a win for the mobile game landscape. However, it would not take long for some new players to find a way to twist the concept of in-app purchases to become something a lot more sinister. Here is a name you probably haven't thought about in a while: Farmville. Farmville initially wasn't a mobile game. It was a game you played on Facebook, tending a virtual farm that you could show off to your friends. But there was a key aspect of Farmville that would be integral to the next phase in the degradation of mobile games. You see, Farmville was a game that actively prevented its players from being able to play it in perpetuity. You were limited in what you could accomplish in the game via a virtual in-game currency called Farm Cash. Farm Cash was required to be spent in order to perform actions necessary to improve your farm and progress in the game. This could be acquired by spamming your friends to help you tend to your farm, in an effort to further perpetuate the game and increase the player base by getting more of your friends into the game, so they could help you progress. Without Farm Cash, you had to rely on waiting for real-life time to elapse, usually measured in hours, significantly slowing your progression in the game. The limited resources to perform actions and the exorbitant timers attached to the otherwise mundane actions would prove to be powerfully addicting, propelling Farmville to the top charts of Facebook's gaming platform, and becoming the key to blowing the doors open on predatory mobile game monetization. It was a business model fit for a king. King is a company best known for its mobile game Candy Crush Saga, but its first major release was another browser puzzle game called Bubble Witch Saga. King took note of Farmville's success in the browser space and decided to replicate its progression model for its own games. Bubble Witch Saga aped the energy method put in place by Farmville, but instead of relying on long timers like Farmville did, it instead broke up its puzzles into small packs called sagas. Players had a limited amount of attempts to clear a saga. If you failed to clear a saga with all of your allotted attempts, you had to wait real-world time for them to regenerate before you could try again. Or, like Farmville, you could annoy your friends on Facebook to sign up and play the games themselves to instantly refill your lives. King would follow up Bubble Witch Saga with Candy Crush Saga, which used the exact same progression method, and in 2012 would port both the games from Facebook to mobile phones for free with ad support, similar to what Rovio did with Angry Birds. However, instead of having a single purchase to clear the ads, King would instead have in-app purchases be an option to restore your lives instantly without waiting if you failed a saga, meaning that only a few real-world dollars would separate you from being able to instantly pick up right where you left off in the game. And thus, the beginning of the modern microtransaction was born. The effect of microtransactions on King's business was enormous. Revenue from Bubble Witch and Candy Crush rose from $62 million via Facebook in 2011 to $1.88 billion in 2012 from ads and in-app purchases on mobile. The in-app purchase hook was so powerful that the following year, in 2013, King opted to remove the banner ads altogether because the revenue they generated was so insignificant compared to in-app purchases that they weren't worth the annoyance they'd inflict on players. Interestingly, only about 2.3% of Candy Crush players would actually end up paying to play the game, but that tiny fraction was enough to generate over $23 million a month in profit for King. Almost at the same time, Japanese mobile company Gung Ho Entertainment launched Puzzles & Dragons, which brought a nearly identical monetization model that King was using to their hybrid Match 3 monster collecting game, and saw similar returns in their home market, earning them over $3 million in revenue per day, and causing the company's public valuation to surpass Nintendo. With numbers like that, the freemium model became the new de facto standard for mobile gaming. Part 3. The hooks sink deeper. By the end of 2012, mobile games were no longer a budding industry. They were a massive business, both with newcomers that were making a name for themselves in the mobile space, and established gaming companies like Activision and EA, which were all vying for a piece of the pie. The model was clear. Freemium games with addictive gameplay loops and impulse price microtransactions that preyed on a player's impatience and desire for social credit to keep the money flowing. But there was still one aspect missing from the playbook. Games like Candy Crush and Puzzles & Dragons, for all of their addictive incentives, were still, at the end of the day, single-player games. Sure, they had some basic social integration and a vestigial aspect of the model's beginnings on Facebook. But as any good businessman will tell you, social proof and keeping up with your peers are some of the best psychological triggers to incentivize purchases you can have in a product. If mobile games were going to collect all of the money, they would have to do more. Enter Clash of Clans. Clash of Clans is a city management and tower defense strategy game released by Supercell in 2012. Building on the freemium model that came before it, Clash of Clans evolved the model by introducing multiplayer. Players take on the role of a village chief tasked with growing their small encampment into as massive a military as possible, This is primarily done through collecting resources by raising troops and attacking other real-world players' villages. Victory in these skirmishes netted more resources stolen from what the losing player had to offer, and could then be used to further build their army and fortify their own village from incoming attacks from other players looking to do the same to them. These battles would happen asynchronously, players being able to attack each other even while the opponents were offline, and defenses being handled automatically by the system. So proper preparation and investment in the strength of one's village was paramount to long-term success. The most important feature was the social aspect. While you could play by yourself, your chances of success rose rapidly by joining a clan, as then your attacks and defenses would automatically be bolstered by your clanmates, giving you an extra edge in combat. This social pressure of your performance not only affecting your gameplay, but those of your clanmates, tied into the ever-present temptation of in-app purchases to expedite building times in order to help both yourself and your clan more effectively, which proved to be ever more lucrative and catapulted Clash of Clans to the top of the App Store. Clash of Clans broke the mold in another way too. Unlike Angry Birds or Candy Crush, Clash of Clans was a fair bit more complex by comparison, requiring a much more nuanced understanding of the game's systems in order to master it. This was necessary by its very nature as a multiplayer game. Competition requires some sort of skill-based element in order to give agency to, and satisfaction in, besting your human opponents. So there had to be more to the gameplay loop than just a simple jingling of digital keys, like single-player games could get away with. This greater depth meant Clash of Clans, while still generally accessible, couldn't appeal to as wide a market as something like Candy Crush could. But, on the other hand, those that fell under its spell had a far deeper, more powerful rabbit hole to tumble down, and, by extension, many more opportunities to potentially spend money. Imitators of the Clash of Clans formula, like Game of War, would push this complex gameplay even further, narrowing the focus but deepening the depths you could sink into the game. Supercell would find that players would reportedly spend thousands of hours playing Clash of Clans, caught in this addictive gameplay loop of tug-of-war with other players, vying for the top of the leaderboards, and feeling like a contributing part of their own clan, while spawning rivalries with opposing ones. The injection of a far more direct social aspect of Clash of Clans created a new class of mobile gamer, one dedicated to spending as much time and money as possible to achieve ultimate victory. The mobile market had discovered their whales. Part 4. Let's go whaling.
Some of you will probably be slightly shocked by all the tricks I have listed here, but I'll leave the morality of it out of the talk. We can discuss it if we have time later.
The term whale originally came from the casino industry as a term for someone who was primed to spend a lot of money indiscriminately, and the parallels to what becomes of the mobile game market will become more direct as we continue. It's hard to not look at a business practice that refers to its most lucrative compulsive spenders as whales, that it has to open a talk on the subject with a plea to ignore the subject's ethics, and then go on to talk about how to trick your players into spending money, and not conclude that it's exploiting its player base. Whaling is simply an extension of the obvious data already revealed by the success of games like Candy Crush. Only a small segment of people playing free games will likely ever pay. So instead of trying to cast a wide a net as possible and convert more players into payers, whaling attempts to quadruple down on that small sliver of the market, already primed to pay, using psychological manipulation to further lure in unchecked spending. And it's not just passionate, but greedy game designers trying to think up of their best guesses. These companies go out of their way to hire psychologists to specifically engineer their games to be as addictive as possible. Ever wonder why that one guy you know is just so into Fortnite? Or maybe that someone is you. It is because Epic Games hired professionals to design their economy to addict you, to the point that they were sued over the practice. The problem is that, at this point in time, gaming was now the most profitable form of entertainment, surpassing even Hollywood. Thus, if you were a lifelong corporate executive whose sole goal in life is to amass as much wealth as possible, conscience be damned, you now had your sights set squarely on the gaming business. An industry that had spent so long trying to prove to the public that it was a legit form of art had finally succeeded, and is now being milked for every dime, like every other golden goose before it. Massive spending from these exploited customers is exasperated even further with the implementation of the industry's favorite surprise mechanic: loot boxes. Loot boxes are when a game company decides to randomize their in-app purchases, allowing players to purchase a pack of items or box of randomized in-game rewards at a set price. The items contained within are ranked at different levels of rarity, with the best items being the hardest to acquire. This method of selling game components at random is hardly new. Collectible card games, such as Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh!, has been using this as their primary business model for decades. But adding it to video games can be considered a bit more insidious, because card games are physical items, so an entire secondary market can form around the cards. Sure, you can choose to buy booster packs and chase the cards you need for your deck you're building in Magic. Or you can go onto eBay or to your local game store and buy exactly what you need at whatever the rate the market has settled on as a relative value. But loot boxes are entirely virtual, so no secondary market exists. These games, purposely by and large, forbid user trading of items, forcing players to repeatedly buy loot boxes over and over again at the chance that they might get what they need. An analog to the CCG booster packs in Japan are a collectible figure vending machine called gachapon, an entire genre of mobile games coming out of Japan, digitizing the business model of gachapon, where acquiring new playable characters for the game are unlocked at random by purchasing packs, also known as gacha games, emerged in lockstep with loot boxes, with examples such as Love Live, AFK Arena, Fate Go, and Genshin Impact, aka Thigh Gap the game. Love drowning in sponsored segments for Raid Shadow Legends? That's a gacha game. Even Nintendo got in on the action with their mobile title Fire Emblem Heroes and Dragalia Lost, implementing gacha monetization mechanics. Loot boxes and gacha mechanics were so effective that they were eventually adopted full stop by AAA console and PC space as well. Overwatch, a popular multiplayer shooter, popularized the practice and term loot box, but it was hardly the first. EA had been experimenting with the feature in their games since 2012, with the launch of Mass Effect 3, its multiplayer-locked upgraded weapons and classes entirely around its version of loot boxes. The mechanic itself an experiment in monetizing a feature dreamed up by a developer working on FIFA called Ultimate Team, a way of opening randomized card packs to build custom teams of players with the best possible stats. Ultimate Team is now the headlining feature of all modern FIFA titles, and is fully monetized, with that mode alone generating almost $1.5 billion for the company in 2020 alone. Oh, and the developer who dreamed up Ultimate Team in the first place? That was Andrew Wilson, who is now the current CEO of Electronic Arts. All of this info kind of begs the question: why is so much effort put into these monetization practices? Why not focus on console gamers and PC players, people to whom gaming is a central part of their identity? I mean, clearly, the monetization schemes that started on mobile still work in the home console space, and you can charge $60 upfront over there. Well, there are a few reasons. The first is the scope of AAA development. It costs a lot more upfront to make a AAA video game, considering the power of modern hardware and the resulting expectations of the gaming public. Remember, mobile games started as a space primarily for smaller studios to get a chance in the limelight. And despite massive profit potential beyond anyone's expectations, that smaller scale never really went away. For example, the latest title from Naughty Dog, The Last of Us Part 2, had a reported development cost of over $100 million. By contrast, mobile smash hit Among Us was made essentially on nothing but grit and passion. The risk-reward proposition on mobile is just far more in the favor of the developer. Another obvious reason is the player base. Yes, gamers care more about games, but that's a double-edged sword to a would-be greedy developer. In-app purchases in the AAA space did not go over nearly as well as they did on mobile. While IAP still represents a huge slice of the current AAA market revenue, it was possible to push this crowd too far. The insane monetization of Star Wars Battlefront 2 caused a titanic backlash from the community, forcing EA to remove the loot boxes from the game entirely. The resulting shitstorm actually prompted legal investigations by certain governments in Europe and caught the attention of some senators in the US. Ironically enough, the defense of loot boxes' legality was that it was technically not gambling because, unlike gambling, loot box rewards have no real-world value. So, by the letter of the law, it couldn't be considered gambling, which, great. That's a fantastic defense for your practice. Actually, the shit we're getting children addicted to is actually worth less than hooking them up with a slot machine, so we're free to go, right? Passionate customers are far more willing to call you out on your bullshit if you start to mess with their hobby. Mobile players, by contrast, seem entirely unfazed by the continued monetization schemes cooked up in their space. Both of these reasons are really just two aspects of the same root reason, though. The fact of the matter is, the console market is chump change compared to smartphones. Let me hit you with some numbers. The best-selling console of all time is the PlayStation 2. Throughout its entire life cycle, it sold 155 million units. Its more modern contemporary, the PS4, launched in 2013 and went on to sell 108 million units as of right now. The same year the PS4 launched, in 2013, mobile phones sold nearly 1 billion units. That means, for every PS4 that was sold in the console's entire 7-year run, nearly 10 smartphones were sold in its launch year alone. Consoles, PC, those are monopoly money. You ever heard of a game called Fortnite? Pretty popular. Zoomers love it. It's on everything. It has an in-game economy for days, making Epic a stupid amount of money. According to the internet, on all platforms, Fortnite has made $2.4 billion. And that's Fortnite, the biggest game of all time, right? Right? Fucking please. Candy Crush Saga, $5.7 billion. Pokemon Go, $6.4 billion. Puzzles and Dragons, $7 billion. And the big granddaddy of them all, as of writing, is Monster Strike, with a whopping $8.78 billion. That is 3 times the amount of Avengers Endgame's worldwide gross. Real games are baby shit. The only games that come close to numbers like this are games like League of Legends and Dungeon Fighters Online, but those are massive games that require tons of upkeep on the part of the developers and have been around for decades. These phone games have been going on for half the amount of time and require a fraction of the development effort, and are on a platform that is only continuing to grow as new markets like India and Africa begin to become saturated. Mobile games have continued to evolve since the introduction of the loot box. While that method of monetization has largely fallen out of favor with the hardcore crowd on console and PC, it lives on mobile. Crossplay has allowed companies like Epic to justify bringing mobile monetization practices to popular titles like Fortnite, since now it's also technically a phone game. Genshin Impact is one of the largest games on mobile, as well as console and PC via crossplay, and its economy is driven entirely by gacha mechanics. Pokemon Go increased the profits for the Pokemon Company year over year by 2,600% in its first year alone, solely on the back of in-app purchases. Bethesda Softworks, a studio that, well, at least used to, have tons of respect from the core gaming crowd, released a mobile version of their Elder Scrolls series that was barely more than a loot box dispenser with an Elder Scrolls coat of paint. And while the core gaming market fights hard to push back against the practice, there's no more denying that there's money, and thus more weight, to the casual crowd that plays FIFA on the couch and mobile games on the go. And companies will follow the money over the pleas of their customers most invested in the medium as an art form. Mobile gaming started as a promising platform to give new voices a platform to use. Those voices, unfortunately, just happened to eventually be used to pioneer new levels of abusive greed. Conclusion. Video games are the most profitable entertainment medium in the world right now, and mobile games are the most profitable segment of that medium. Like it or not, the accessibility of the content and the ubiquity of the platform has made mobile games a financial juggernaut, and the greater industry takes note of what it does. Even if you're a gamer who has no interest in the mobile industry, nearly everything the home gaming market has done over the last 10 years that has drawn ire from the core gaming audience has been tactics first tested and honed in the mobile space. So, like it or not, the entire industry is primed to follow the lead of a market that is more interested in Skinner box schemes wrapped in a threadbare interactive experience than making a quality product that ethically engages players. Going forward, the mobile gaming market will continue to test the waters with new monetary schemes to maximize profits, as the CEOs in this industry are here to chase increasing profits, not advance games as an art form. As smartphones continue to become more capable and newer markets continue to saturate with ever more users, we'll continue to see more and more mobile players be enraptured by these psychological triggers embedded in these allegedly free games, only to have the most effective tricks be exported to the rest of the market. To the old millennials with fond memories of the N64 or the PS2, the blatant nickel and diming feels like a complete betrayal of a hobby that only a few short years ago was desperately trying to prove to the wider world that it was a valid medium of entertainment. But to most people under 20, this is what games have always been, and such a strong segment of the market, raised on smartphones and in-app purchases, are completely numb to the presence of them, all but guaranteeing the continued proliferation of these systems. The App Store is still host to a fair amount of games that are created out of a love for the medium, just as much as they are hoping to make a profit. Indie developers can still stand to invest little and gain much in exposure and success on such a thriving platform. One has to look no further than Among Us to see a game built with both accessibility and integrity that can still pay off in dividends. But titles like that are increasingly becoming diamonds in the rough, when tens of billions of dollars can potentially be made by preying on people's impatience after drawing them in with a deceptive ad. The mobile game market has devolved over the last decade, with increasingly manipulative practices that border on outright criminality, that have forced government investigations and continued moral outrage. But until these practices are punished either legally or financially, the App Store will continue to plummet towards lowest common denominator slot machine mechanics that prey on the most vulnerable. Omugus.